The first warning didn't come from my daughter. It came from a stranger who looked terrified to be seen talking to me. "Please," the woman whispered, gripping my arm as I stepped toward the front door. "You cannot go inside. Leave right now." Her fingers trembled so badly I thought she might faint. She kept glancing over her shoulder at the house, as if someone were watching us through the walls. I froze on the porch, confused, embarrassed, and suddenly afraid. This was my daughter's home, the same house I had helped her buy years ago, the same house I believed held a second chance for us. My name is Alina Price. I'm 58 years old. And until that night, I believed the worst pain a mother could experience was being abandoned without explanation. For over a year, my daughter Natalie had vanished from my life. No arguments, no fights, no final phone call. Just silence. My messages stayed unread. My calls went to voicemail. Holidays passed with no reply. I replayed every memory, searching for the moment I must have ruined everything. Then, 3 days ago, my phone buzzed. "Mom, can we have dinner this Thursday? I miss you." I read that message so many times my eyes hurt. Hope came rushing back despite every warning voice in my head telling me not to trust it. I told myself this was healing. A reunion, the beginning of forgiveness. I dressed carefully that evening. I wore the necklace Natalie gave me years ago, the last Christmas before everything fell apart. I practiced what I would say if she cried, what I would say if she didn't. But the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The porch light was dim. The yard was stripped bare, like life had been removed on purpose. No music, no warmth, just silence that felt staged. And then the woman appeared, Natalie's housekeeper, I later learned, running toward me in panic. "If you stay," she whispered urgently, "you will not walk out of this house." She released my arm and disappeared inside before I could ask a single question. Every instinct I developed during my own abusive marriage screamed at me to listen, so I did something I never expected. I went back to my car, but I didn't leave. I turned off the engine, lowered my seat, and watched the house in silence. Minutes later, the lights came on, one room at a time. Shapes moved behind the windows. A man laid papers across the dining table. Another paced while speaking on the phone. Then Natalie walked in. She didn't smile. She didn't look confused. She picked up a pen and signed. That was the moment I knew. This dinner invitation was never about reconciliation. It was about something far darker. And whatever plan was unfolding inside that house, I had already been written into it. But what those documents were, and why my daughter had been convinced to sign them, was something I would discover far too late. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Natalie's hand moving across those papers, steady, unquestioning, obedient. That wasn't my daughter. Or at least, it wasn't the girl I raised. By dawn, I had convinced myself of two things. First, whatever was happening inside that house was deliberate. Second, someone inside it was afraid enough to warn me. My phone buzzed just after sunrise. "Unknown number, it's me. I shouldn't be texting. Please delete this message after reading. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Public place only." No name, no explanation, but I already knew who it was. The cafe near the central train station was loud, crowded, and perfect for disappearing in plain sight. I arrived early, chose a table with a clear view of the entrance, and wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee I never drank. When she walked in, she barely looked like the same woman from the night before. Her hair was tucked beneath a hat. A scarf hid most of her face. She sat down quickly, her body angled away from me, eyes scanning the room. "My name is Clara," she whispered. "I clean the house. I shouldn't be talking to you." I waited. Silence felt safer than questions. "He controls everything," she said finally. "What she eats, who she speaks to, when she sleeps. He tells her what's true and what isn't." My chest tightened. I asked the question I had been dreading. "Does Natalie believe him?" Clara's eyes dropped to the table. "She doesn't know what she believes anymore." She explained how my calls were intercepted, how messages were deleted before Natalie ever saw them, how every disagreement between mother and daughter had been carefully rewritten until I became the villain. Then Clara leaned closer, her voice shaking. "He needs your signature." I felt the blood drain from my face. She slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were legal documents stamped, organized, and terrifyingly professional. My name appeared at the bottom of every page. My signature was there, but it wasn't mine. They're preparing to transfer property, Clara whispered. Assets Natalie inherited, things you still control. I could barely breathe. Then she said the words that shattered whatever calm I had left. I heard them talking about you. About how accidents happen every day, how no one asks questions when things look natural. The cafe noise blurred. My hands gripped the table to keep from collapsing. This wasn't a reconciliation, I whispered. Clara shook her head. It was a setup. I left the cafe knowing one thing with terrifying clarity. I wasn't just being erased from my daughter's life. I was being removed from the picture entirely. And the moment I returned home, I would discover just how far they had already gone to make that happen. By the time I reached my apartment, I already knew something was wrong. The hallway lights were on when they shouldn't have been. My door wasn't wide open, but it wasn't locked either. That tiny detail told me more than any broken window ever could. Someone had been inside. I stepped in slowly, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. Drawers were pulled halfway out. Papers lay scattered across the floor, not carelessly, but methodically. Whoever came here wasn't searching blindly. They knew exactly what they wanted. I rushed to my desk, dropped to my knees, and opened the hidden panel beneath it. The small safe was unlocked. Empty. The folder was gone, not the jewelry, not the electronics. Just the documents, old property records, inheritance papers, handwritten notes I had kept because I didn't trust anyone else to protect them. I sank onto the floor, my legs giving out beneath me. That was when my phone rang. It was my workplace. An anonymous complaint had been filed against me. Financial misconduct, abuse of authority. Effective immediately, I was placed on administrative leave while an investigation took place. The timing was too perfect. They weren't just stealing assets, they were dismantling my credibility. I hung up and sat there in the quiet, finally understanding the shape of the trap being built around me. If I went to the police now, I would sound defensive, desperate, unstable, exactly how they wanted me to look. I made one call to an old friend from college, now a lawyer known for handling fraud cases no one else would touch. When I told him everything, he didn't interrupt. Then he said, "You need to leave tonight." "What?" "They've already moved against you," he said calmly. "This isn't emotional, it's strategic, and the next step will be to isolate you completely." Before I could argue, he arrived at my apartment. One look at the ransacked room was enough. "They were searching for leverage," he said, "and they found some." I packed nothing, not clothes, not photographs, nothing that would slow me down. We drove in silence to a remote house owned by a relative who owed no one explanations and asked no questions. As the city disappeared behind us, fear settled deep in my chest, but beneath it, something else began to rise. Clarity. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. This was a controlled operation. And Natalie was trapped at the center of it, but what I didn't yet understand was this: escaping myself was easy. Reaching my daughter, without triggering his next move, would be the real battle. The door was already unlocked. That was the first thing that made my stomach tighten. We hadn't knocked. We hadn't announced ourselves. Yet the back entrance stood slightly open, as if the house itself had been waiting. A thin draft slid past my ankles, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant instead of food or warmth. This was not a home. It was a controlled environment. Inside, everything was spotless, too spotless. No shoes by the door. No mail on the counter. No personal clutter. It felt less like someone lived here and more like someone was being stored here. Natalie sat on the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket despite the heat. When she saw me, fear, not relief, flashed across her face. "Mom, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If he finds out," her voice broke, and she looked toward the hallway as if expecting someone to step out at any second. I stopped several feet away. I didn't reach for her. I didn't raise my voice. Every movement had to tell her one thing: she was still in control. "I'm not here to fight," I said softly. "I just want to understand." She shook her head, hands gripping the blanket tightly. "You don't know what you're interrupting." That sentence hit harder than any accusation ever could. A woman I trusted stepped forward, the same one who had warned me weeks earlier. She placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward Natalie. "These are documents you signed," she said gently. "Do you remember signing them?" Natalie stared at the pages, blinking rapidly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I showed her my phone. "The dinner invitation," I said. "Did you send this?" She studied the screen for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. No, she whispered. I don't think I did. That was the crack, not dramatic, not loud, just a single moment where doubt slipped past fear. Another document was placed on the table, one with my forged signature. Natalie flinched. I would never ask you to sign something without explaining it, I said. You know that. Her breathing grew uneven. He said you were trying to take things from me. The words sounded rehearsed, memorized. The woman beside her spoke again, voice trembling. I heard him talking about an accident, about how it would solve everything. Natalie's head snapped up. That's not true, she said quickly, too quickly. Then silence, her eyes filled with tears she didn't wipe away. I feel like I'm constantly wrong, she whispered. Like if I don't agree, something bad happens. I took one careful step closer. You're allowed to leave, I said. Right now, no explanations. She looked at the door, then back at me. I want to go, she said. And in that moment, the control shattered. But freedom doesn't come quietly, and the second we stepped outside, he realized he was losing her. We had been gone less than 10 minutes when the phone rang. The sound sliced through the car like glass. Natalie flinched so hard her seatbelt locked. Her hands flew to her ears as if the voice hadn't even spoken yet, but her body already knew who it would be. No, she whispered. Please don't answer. The woman driving didn't hesitate. She switched the call to speaker. Where is she? The voice barked. No greeting, no hesitation, just ownership wrapped in rage. You were told never to take her phone. Natalie curled in on herself, breath shallow and frantic. Every mile we put between her and that house didn't erase the fear yet, it only exposed how deeply it had lived inside her. She's not here, the woman replied, voice shaking but steady. I stepped out to run errands. Silence. Then the voice dropped, low and dangerous. If you're lying, you'll regret it. I'm coming back. The call ended. No warning, no goodbye. The car accelerated. That was when I understood something critical. This wasn't escape. It was pursuit. We didn't go home. We didn't go anywhere predictable. We drove to a place no address could lead him to, a remote house surrounded by open land and bad signal. Inside, we locked every door, shut every curtain, turned off every light that might leak through the windows. Natalie sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, shaking so violently I thought she might pass out. He always finds me, she whispered. He always knows. I knelt beside her. Not this time. But even as I said it, the air felt tight, charged. Hours passed. Then came the sound. A sharp crack, glass shattering. Natalie screamed. A shadow moved across the window, followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. The door handle rattled. Open the door, the voice roared. You're making this worse. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stood between Natalie and the hallway. A figure burst through the side entrance, eyes wild, face stripped of its polite mask. This wasn't the man neighbors admired. This was obsession exposed. She's my wife, he shouted. You have no right to take her. Before anyone could respond, red and blue lights flashed across the walls. Sirens, he froze. Then, with terrifying precision, he turned and pointed at me. She kidnapped her, he said calmly. My wife is mentally unstable. The words landed like a weapon. The door flew open. Officers stepped inside. And the question that followed would decide everything. Miss, one of them said gently to Natalie, are you here against your will? Natalie's body trembled. She looked at him, then at me. And for the first time, she didn't look away. What Natalie said next didn't just change the night, it changed the fate of all of us. The room went completely silent. Even the officers seemed to hold their breath as they waited for Natalie's answer. The flashing lights outside painted the walls in red and blue, like warning signals from a world she had just stepped out of. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, shoulders shaking, fingers digging into her sleeves. I could see the war playing out inside her, the years of obedience fighting against the fragile truth that had only just begun to surface. The man stepped closer, his voice instantly soft, almost loving. Natalie, he said gently, you're confused. You didn't mean to run. Come with me and we'll talk privately. The officer turned to her again. Miss, are you being held here against your will? Natalie swallowed hard. I didn't speak. I didn't reach for her. I knew this moment couldn't belong to me. Slowly, she lifted her head. I'm not being held, she said, her voice barely audible. My heart dropped. Then she inhaled sharply and continued. I left because I was scared. The man stiffened. One of the officers straightened. Scared of what? Natalie's hands trembled as she pulled something from her pocket, a small folded paper she had hidden there earlier. She unfolded it slowly, as if afraid the words might disappear. These are copies of documents I was told I signed, she said. I don't remember signing them, and this, her voice cracked, this is a recording. The officer nodded. You can hand it to me. Natalie hesitated, then placed the paper and phone into his hands. As the audio played, the room filled with a calm, calculating voice discussing how problems disappear when accidents look natural. The words didn't sound dramatic. That's what made them terrifying. The man exploded. That's fake. She's being manipulated? Natalie flinched, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she rolled up her sleeve. Dark bruises bloomed under the harsh light, unmistakable, undeniable. The room shifted. One officer stepped forward immediately. Another turned toward the man, his tone cold. Sir, you need to step back. I didn't do that, he shouted. She's unstable. Natalie shook her head, tears streaming now, but her voice was stronger than it had been all night. I believed him every time he apologized, she said. I believed I deserved it. I don't anymore. The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound echoed through the room like a door slamming closed, final, irreversible. As he was led away, Natalie collapsed against me, sobbing uncontrollably. I thought I'd never get out, she whispered. I thought this was my life. I held her, feeling her breathe, real, shaky breaths of someone who had just reclaimed herself. But even as the sirens faded into the distance, I knew the freedom didn't arrive like relief. It arrived like exhaustion. In the days after his arrest, Natalie slept in fragments, 30 minutes here, an hour there, waking at every sound, every shadow. The house was safe, the doors locked, the phone numbers changed, yet her body refused to believe it. Trauma doesn't disappear when danger leaves. It lingers, cautious and alert, waiting to be proven wrong. She apologized constantly. For breathing too loudly, for eating too slowly, for asking questions. Each apology felt like another bruise I couldn't see. Therapy began quietly. No grand breakthroughs, no dramatic revelations. Just small truths spoken between long silences. She learned new words for old pain, conditioning, erosion, compliance. Words that explained how love had been turned into a cage. One afternoon, she asked a question that cut straight through me. Mom, why didn't I leave sooner? I answered honestly. Because you were taught that surviving was the same as living. She cried then, not in panic, not in fear, but in grief, for the years she lost believing she was the problem. There were setbacks. A strange car parked outside sent her into shaking sobs. A voicemail from an unknown number made her hands go numb. Even laughter scared her sometimes, as if joy itself were reckless. But slowly, things changed. She slept longer. She ate without watching the clock. She stood a little straighter. One evening, while washing dishes, she laughed at something small, so unexpected we both froze. Then she laughed again. I forgot what that felt like, she said, wiping her eyes. Weeks later, she made a decision I didn't expect. I want to help people like me, she said quietly, people who still think this is normal. She began volunteering at a support center. At first, she barely spoke. Then one day, she shared a sentence, then a story, then her truth. Each time she spoke, something inside her healed. Meanwhile, the legal process dragged on. Delays, motions, attempts to discredit her. He never apologized, never took responsibility. But Natalie no longer watched the door. She watched the horizon. One night, sitting on the porch, she leaned her head against my shoulder. I don't feel brave, she said. I just feel tired of being afraid. I kissed her hair. That's how courage starts. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet, not the silence of control, but the silence of safety. And just when it felt like the past was finally loosening its grip, the final battle arrived, the one that would decide whether truth could outlast manipulation. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in feeling, cold with procedure, cold with distance. A place where pain had to be translated into evidence before it could be believed. Natalie held my hand as we took our seats. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let go. That alone told me how far she had come. Across the room, he sat perfectly composed. Clean suit, calm posture. The same mask he had worn for years. If someone didn't know the truth, they might believe he was the victim of an unfortunate misunderstanding. That was the most dangerous thing about him. The hearing began with practiced words and rehearsed arguments. His attorney painted Natalie as confused, emotional, unstable. Claimed she had been influenced, manipulated, rescued from nothing. Natalie lowered her eyes, her breath quickening. Then her name was called. She stood slowly. The room seemed to shrink as she walked forward. I saw fear in her face, but beneath it something stronger. Resolve. "I want to speak for myself," she said. Her voice shook at first, but she didn't stop. "I was taught that love meant obedience," she continued. "That questioning was betrayal, that fear was normal." The courtroom grew silent. She described the rules, the isolation, the constant correction, the apologies that followed cruelty, not dramatically, not angrily, just honestly. Then she looked directly at the judge. "I didn't leave because I was weak," she said. "I left because I finally remembered who I was before I was told to disappear." The evidence followed. The recordings, the documents, the timelines that showed intention, not accident, strategy, not chaos. For the first time, his composure cracked. The verdict didn't come immediately. Justice rarely rushes. But when it did, it was clear. Guilty. The word felt heavy, but healing rarely feels light at first. Outside the courthouse, Natalie stopped on the steps and closed her eyes. The wind lifted her hair gently, as if the world itself was exhaling with her. "I don't feel free yet," she said quietly. I smiled through tears. Freedom grows. It doesn't arrive all at once. Months passed, then years. Natalie rebuilt her life piece by piece. She learned to trust her instincts again, to speak without apologizing, to rest without guilt. She now helps others who are still living inside silent cages, people who don't yet know the door can open. And me? I learned that being a mother doesn't end when your child walks away. Sometimes, it begins when you walk back into the darkness to bring them home. If this story stayed with you, ask yourself this: who in your life might still be surviving instead of living, and what would happen if you reached out before it's too late?